Kia ora tātou, Polavanaka, Maloelele, kia ora ana, halo o keta, talo falava, whakalofa alahi atu, and a warm welcome to this Business Link Pacific webinar on climate change. My name is Barbara Wilkinson and I'm BLP's Professional Development Advisor. Now I oversee the BLP Advisor Competency Assessment process, and I'm delighted to be here today with Lily Camacho, who joins us from, where are you, in Canada at the moment, Lily? I think it is, many miles away anyway, but I'd like to welcome you along, Lily, and thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to have a chat. It's probably not the best time for you right now, but yeah, awesome to have a chat with you about climate change and the services that BLP is offering to help MSMEs deal with climate change. So Lily, invite you to come on into the webinar, and perhaps before we start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, how you got into climate change, perhaps? Yeah, just tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here. And I'm really excited that all of you want to learn about climate change and what BLP has been doing. So I started in climate change in 2012, and my first foray into climate change was through the Canadian government's, the federal government Department of Environment. I was an economist there, and I was on the team that modeled Canada's carbon emissions and submitted them to the UN, the United Nations, back when the United Nations started acting kind of globally on carbon emissions. And then from the economics perspective, ended up going into the economic development perspective, and I have been working with SMEs and climate change and sustainability since 2015 all over the world. I've been lucky enough to work with SMEs in Africa and Latin America, Asia Pacific, the Middle East. So doing more or less what we've been doing here in BLP. So it's a fun opportunity for me to continue this work in a new context.
Oh, that's awesome. No, thanks for sharing that. So it sounds like you've got quite a bit of history of working with the SMEs, those small and medium-sized enterprises, which is exactly the businesses that BLP is working with. So look, today's webinar, a very interesting topic. It's all about supporting businesses with climate change. We've got a lot to cover. So we're going to be looking at these three things. We're going to look at why SMEs need an action plan around climate change. We'll look at how Business Link Pacific can help. And we'll also talk about, for the advisors on the webinar today, we'll look at ways that you can expand your services into climate change advisory. Now, before we get into that, though, we've got a quick question to ask of our participants. So if you could have a look in the little chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little message box icon. If you could go in there and click on one of those links that's in there already, or Sandra might be able to just pop another link in there. If you click on that right now, we'd like to engage with you and get your feedback straight away on this question: what climate change issues are impacting your business or your clients right now? So as I go through the format for today, I'll just get you to do that. All right, so if you've got that link, let's move on. So format for today's webinar. I think all of us are doing this already, so we need our microphones and our cameras off, except for Lily and I, of course, throughout the whole webinar. That really just helps to ensure that everyone can hear the speaker, to make sure we've got no connection issues or limited connection issues. Please feel free, though, to use that little message box there anytime throughout the webinar. So that's the chat box. Pop some thoughts in there, pop your comments, your questions in there throughout the webinar. We will also have a specific time for questions, though, and that'll be at the end. And at that stage, we'll let you put your hand up if you want to. Use that little raise hand button, and you can also say your question instead of writing it, if that's easier for you. Now, we are recording the webinar today. And of course, the recording will be available afterwards, along with all our other webinars, if you want to recap on anything or if you want to share it with your colleagues. So that's always saved on the BLP website. So that's the format for today. Now, I want to share a little bit of information with you about BLP for those that aren't very familiar with what we do here. Firstly, the program's funded by the New Zealand government. It's managed by DT Global, and we work across 12 Pacific countries, which are listed on the slide. Each of those countries has a locally based business service manager, and their job is to help both the small, medium-sized enterprises and business advisors to make full use of the BLP services. So Business Link Pacific is all about helping SMEs, those small and medium-sized enterprises, find suitable, experienced, local advisors who can help them with their business issues. And then we also help them with the cost of those services through our subsidy scheme. All BLP advisors are approved, and so that means they go through a quality assurance and competency assessment process, and that's really so that SMEs can be confident that they're being supported by experienced and skilled people. And so the BLP services include a range of things. We've got some online diagnostic tools. There's a whole suite of online tools that businesses can access from the website. We have the finance facility, which helps SMEs to access finance. And of course, we have our various grants. BLP has been offering adaptation grants, support grants, and also looking at co-investment grants to support small businesses to achieve what they need to do. And of course, we offer professional development and learning opportunities for advisors as well. So BLP is in its second phase. It's been going since 2018. We have now over 200 partner advisory firms and a growing network. And we've dished out already lots of subsidies and lots of grants. So you can see here we're heading up really towards around almost 2,000 subsidies that have been provided and almost $5 million worth of grants, which have really helped to trigger new investment in finance and supported the creation of new jobs for SMEs. So we're really proud of that. And our online tools have been really popular too, with around 5,500 downloads. So that's awesome. And these services are ever growing and they're continuing on, and the demand is getting higher and higher as we go. So that's fabulous to see. So a little bit about our first topic for today then. So Lily, I'd really like to understand these three things from you. So, why it's important that SMEs act now, what they need to do, and what it means to mitigate climate change, be resilient and adapt. Can you, Lily, briefly explain firstly then, why it's so important? Can you explain a little bit about the science behind climate change to start off with?
Yes, sure. And climate change is a really popular word right now, but it is quite complex. And so I will try and explain what's happening in a very simple way. So climate change essentially just means variability in the climate. And there has always been some variance in the climate caused by, number one, the orientation of the Earth to the sun. And number two, something that we call the greenhouse effect. And the greenhouse effect is this natural phenomenon that is caused by certain gases in the atmosphere that kind of create a layer over the Earth. So what happens is the sun is very, very hot. It emits radiation, it emits heat that reaches planet Earth. Planet Earth heats up and then radiates this heat outwards. So it kind of releases this heat. Some of it gets trapped within this layer of gases, and then the majority of the heat used to escape kind of beyond those gases and into the atmosphere where it would disperse. Those gases, because they trap the heat, it acts kind of like a greenhouse. So if you ever step into a greenhouse and you feel that it's quite a bit warmer than the outside, and that's what allows things like tomatoes to be able to grow there. So the gases do the same thing on the Earth. This has always been around, but what has been happening, particularly since the 1970s, there has been this very, very rapid buildup of more of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And what has happened is that this layer, this greenhouse gas layer, has become thicker and thicker and thicker. So that means that less heat that comes in from the sun, heats of the earth, gets radiated out from the earth, more heat gets trapped within that greenhouse. And so that has been causing all this warming. But it doesn't just cause warming. So you may recall that at some point, the trend, the buzzword was global warming. And we've moved away from global warming and we use climate change now because it's not just that we're getting warmer, we also see getting colder. Our winters are colder and more extreme. I live in Canada, and in Canada we have more ice storms where it actually like rains ice, freezing rain, and you can get iced in and not open your door. And that used to happen very rarely, but it happens more now. We also have more for example, extreme weather. So you're familiar in the Pacific with cyclones. So cyclones are becoming more frequent and more severe. And so we can see this, and this has been happening particularly since the 1970s, and that has been caused by human activities. So globally, scientists have agreed that this rise and this increase in the greenhouse gases can't be caused from something natural because the rise is too steep. It is caused by things like burning fossil fuels. So our cars from the 1970s onwards, we adopted cars. Cars became common. Plastic became really common, and plastic is a derivative of petroleum, a fossil fuel. And when these things are made, produced or burned, they release carbon dioxide, for example, which is a greenhouse gas. So it's one of the ones that trap heat, and a bunch of other activities release. There's something like 6 or 7 greenhouse gases that all have a similar effect. So that essentially means that there's both. So this is essentially, there's two things that form the backdrop of what BLP is working on right now and how businesses are affected. So the first part is that because these greenhouse gases are caused by human activities, business activity is part of that. So if you are a manufacturer, or if you are using trucks to deliver your goods, you are contributing in some way to the release of greenhouse gases. So there is a concern about what it is that businesses are doing. But in the context of global climate change, for the Pacific Islands, that is very small. So the amount of carbon that is released in all of the Pacific region is so tiny compared to the amount of carbon released by the US or by China or by India. And so we can do our part in reducing carbon emissions, and that is excellent because we all need to act. But the main concern actually for businesses is the risk that climate change poses to the business. And we'll go through a little bit more about that and what resilience means in terms of climate change.
Awesome. I like this graph that you've got up here, which really demonstrates what you're talking about with that change. Hey, like you notice on the right hand side how that change has just dramatically changed, increased since like you say the 70s, or the this period here, the 70s and 60s even, it starts going up quite a lot. So and interesting, I hadn't really thought about it, but the terminology is really important, isn't it? So it's changed from global warming to climate change, and I hadn't really noticed that, but you're absolutely right, we don't use that term anymore.
Yeah, so that graph that you're looking at is basically variance from an average temperature. So since you're right, 60s to 70s onwards, we've been having hotter summers and colder winters, and this is not, it's not on track at all. It doesn't mirror at all what's been happening in the past.
Yeah. So you were saying before, it's in the Pacific. I mean, obviously what you're saying is the Pacific aren't huge contributors to this issue, but they are huge recipients of the issue that's impacting them in a mega way, in a very big way. So what does it mean for businesses? What does it look like, and what can they do about it?
Yeah, so if you want to go on to the next slide, we kind of can talk a little bit about the ways that businesses can respond. And what you're asking about is how we cope with the damages of climate change on businesses. So it's essentially businesses are going to need some help with coping with increased tropical storms, for example, ensuring that their businesses are resilient to these short-term and long-term changes in climate. So more storms and sea rise potentially mean losing income because their distribution of goods to stores is being interrupted, for example. They may lose assets and have to rebuild. They might lose inventory because their storage facility flooded. So those are real business risks. And technically, the word that is used in the climate change profession is adaptation. But we at BLP, we use the word resilience because adaptation can be a little bit tricky to understand, and it is such a specific kind of word that what we really are going for is resilience. We mean this capacity to bounce back, this capacity to deal with change, this capacity to flourish in the face of climate change impacts. And then on this image, you can see the other part of it, the mitigation bit, which is stopping the harmful causes of climate change. And there are real business opportunities, market opportunities, and competitive opportunities too that arise from doing things like reducing your use of fossil fuels, becoming eco-friendly.
Okay, so you're talking about mitigating and resilience, and obviously it seems like the terminology is quite important. But what are the sorts of things that are impacting businesses in the Pacific? I mean, I'm really interested to know how that looks. How does that show up? What are some of the impacts? So actually, maybe we can go to the results of our audience poll for starters, and just see what our audience has to say about that. I think we've got a few responses coming in. Let me just move that across. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Right. So let's just have a look. So we asked the question, which of the following climate issues impact the business you advise or the business that you own the most? So interesting, no business impact, the blue there. It's only showed up once here. And here, unable to provide a safe workplace, but otherwise there's been impact. There's been impact on business. And look at this one. The significant impact in terms of loss or damage to buildings, land, or property. Significant and also medium impact and some minor impact due to loss of customers not being able to reach them. And here, a medium impact being unable to access supplies. So that's quite interesting. Unable to meet customer expectations. These are all issues. That's all how it's showing up. So that's from our audience poll. Thank you, everyone, for sharing how climate change is impacting you. Unable to provide a safe workplace. Yeah, all really important issues. This just tells us a little bit about who you are. So what sectors do you work with most often in your SME advisory work? So interesting, we've got quite a lot of retailers, we've got a lot of tourism people, and a lot of manufacturing here people on the call. So as well as these other sectors as well. So no, thank you for sharing that. Lily, what in your experience, what other issues does climate change impose on businesses?
They tend to show up, they're business problems that business owners are familiar with, but their causes are climate change related. So they may be problems that businesses are already experiencing, but they're becoming more and more frequent. I'll give you some examples. Buildings just came up. So for example, I spend tens of thousands of dollars on rebuilding my shop and storage area after the cyclone. How do I prevent this next time? Or I keep getting asked if my products are sustainably sourced in fair trade. They're not, but I want to certify my business to remain competitive. So that's a competition issue, but it's a sustainability issue as well. I'm in the fishing business, and every year I catch less and less fish. In 2 years, the catch will be so low that I will be losing money. Can you help me find a new stream of income? So this fishing, right? The fishing habitats are affected by the change in the pH level of the ocean, the acidity of the ocean, which is caused by climate change. And it poses a big risk to the stock that businesses use. It provides their entire income. Or customers are asking if my product is eco-friendly. How do I know? And how do I make my product eco-friendly? Again, a market competition issue that is actually linked to climate and sustainability.
So these questions sound like they're pretty tricky to answer, actually, and pretty tricky to address. So what are some of the things that small businesses can do to deal with some of these things?
Sure. And you might have heard some reference to the language already, but essentially the three things that businesses can do is adapt, and I'll explain what these mean: adapt, build resilience, or mitigate. So adapting, essentially it means seeing what's coming, using your existing skills and assets to reduce the negative impacts on the business. So for example, you could protect assets against bad weather. If you could tie down some outdoor furniture, for example. You could improve your safety and hazard awareness. You could restore indigenous plants and animals so that indigenous plants, for example, that can absorb more water and not prevent some flooding. Or restore drainage networks, again, to reduce risks of flooding. Building resilience is a little bit of a step further. So building resilience means to build new skills and upgrade your assets, or gain new assets, or gain new knowledge to get ahead of these negative impacts, to make it easier to rebuild after the climate event. So you're kind of building your capacity to take these responsive measures. Examples are diversify your income streams, taking care of water supplies, contingency planning, or getting some insurance cover so that it's easier to bounce back. And then the last thing is you could mitigate your impacts. So mitigation means reducing your emissions and impact to the environment, to the air, to the water, and to the land. That could look like reducing dependence on fossil fuels. Oh. Could somebody just mute themselves, please? Thank you.
Okay.
So reducing dependence on fossil fuels, reducing waste and use of virgin materials like virgin plastics or virgin cardboard, eliminating use of chemical pesticides.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm quite curious about the terminology because I kind of see it differently. So obviously this is a key thing for climate change, for the climate change sector. I mean, so I sort of see building resilience as being able to cope with it. So it's still there. You can't do much about it, but you're building your ability to cope with it. Is that a way of looking at that? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. How do you cope better with climate impacts? Yes.
So what about mitigating? I sort of think of mitigating as about being, it's there, it's not going to go away, but you can try and reduce it or minimize it, and in some parts you can eliminate it or the effects of it. Is that how you'd see mitigating?
This is what I mean by the wording is really tricky. It's very specific when we're talking about climate change. Right. So mitigation refers only in the climate change world. It refers exclusively to the reduction of carbon emissions or polluting essentially. So right. you are mitigating your impact on the environment. And that is only a climate change world thing, because otherwise you could totally talk about mitigating impacts to you.
Okay, so it's reducing what you do on the climate.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Awesome. That's good. And so the adaptation, I kind of think of adaptation more of, you're kind of adapting so that, yes, we've got this climate change issue, but I don't really need to worry about it too much because I've adapted to the extent that it's no longer impacting me. Mm-hmm. So that might be, yeah, go on.
Yeah. That's a good way of thinking about it, except that the impacts are getting worse and worse. And so at some point you need to kind of increase your capacity. Perhaps you weren't impacted this year and you're not impacted next year, but you will be impacted the year after.
Right. So, and I suppose these things are kind of interlinked, aren't they? Because what you might do to adapt also builds resilience, and it kind of helps mitigate the issue. I'm sort of thinking like, if you plant trees, that helps all around. Hang on a second, Steve. I'm going to mute you if you don't mind. Thank you. it kind of yeah, they're very much interlinked.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. No, thanks. I think it's important to get that understanding right, because it's not intuitive, I don't think.
And you're right, it's not intuitive, it's so specific. And in the BLP context, actually, we have grouped adaptation and building resilience together. So we just kind of refer to it all as resilience, but it encompasses both things because they're so closely linked.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's. I mean, these sound like really difficult challenges, I have to say, for businesses to manage on their own. So let's head into our next topic, which talks more about the BLP climate framework and what help you can get from BLP with mitigating, with building resilience, and with adapting to climate change. So firstly, then. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know that there's some of the online tools for start off with. Can you tell us a little bit about the online tools that BLP has?
Yes, sure. So we have two. The first one is the Climate Action Sensor. The Climate Action Sensor is a simple self-assessment to determine how small and medium-sized enterprises can take action on climate change. So it's designed for an SME owner or manager to undertake. It measures their business resilience levels, impact on soil, air, water, and starts to identify opportunities for climate change, innovations, or projects they can undertake. Essentially, it's a high-level view of a business's climate change priorities. So the SME owner would take this small assessment and then walk away with a few priority actions that make sense for them to take. At that point, BLP reaches out and connects this SME with local climate advisors that have the expertise to start working on these priorities.
Okay, so where can you find the Climate Action Sensor?
The Climate Action Sensor is available online at the BLP website in the Business Toolkit section.
Okay, awesome. And actually, I think we've got a link to that at the end of the webinar too. So that's cool. All right. So the in-depth diagnostic tool, can you tell us about that?
This is our second online tool. This tool is designed for use by business advisors. Essentially, it helps them conduct a comprehensive assessment of the business. So it covers the same sections. We have mitigation, adaptation, resiliency, and green innovation, same as the Climate Action Sensor, but it asks many more questions about the business's processes, policies and plans, staffing strategies, for example, and targets in regarding various climate and environmental aspects. So for example, the climate change resilience section dives into aspects like business continuity planning, staying abreast of weather events, and establishing a financial plan for weather disaster and rebuilding. So it goes very much in depth, a lot more than the initial climate scan that was designed for business managers. So this tool is, it's an online tool. It will be posted soon. It is not yet available. Okay,
so it will be available online and it's kind of free to access eventually. Okay, awesome. All right. Okay, and co-investment grants. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so SMEs can access advisor services, so can work with business advisors that are subsidized in part by BLP. They require some investment by the business owner, and then BLP supports some of the costs as well. And so the business can undertake work in adaptation and resilience or mitigation, or start to develop a new climate change offering, green innovation, a new product or service, for example. There is also other sorts of financial support that is available within the region. We know that in Fiji, for example, the Fiji Development Bank is offering a few financing products. These are low-interest loan packages oriented specifically at sustainability initiatives, and there's one oriented at electric vehicle purchase. They have specific eligibility requirements for SMEs stuff around the age of the firm, the gender balance on the management team. So they do require some like careful investigation to see if a business can qualify for them, but they are fairly sizable and can help definitely in different kinds of climate change initiatives.
Right. So in terms of the BLP support then, so there's some really good online diagnostic tools, and there's some grants funding available, and there's some advisory services that you can get subsidised through BLP to help with climate change. So let's have a bit of a closer look at those advisory services that SMEs can access through BLP. So just explain broadly what they are.
Sure. Yes. So advisors, if you are a business advisor right now and you're attending, this might be interesting for you as a potential new advisory area that you might want to pursue some training on.
Sorry, Lily.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask people to switch off their cameras. It's just interfering with the signals. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome, everyone. If you wouldn't mind, I have been switching a few off as we go, but if you could keep your cameras off and also your microphones, I know it impacts the connection. Thanks for that, Sandra. Really appreciate that. Sorry, Lily, carry on.
No problem. So our advisor areas, and if you are an entrepreneur, you might be interested in seeking some support in these areas. So they mirror what we were talking about before: mitigation, resilience, and then innovation as well. So the 3 climate change advisory areas are environmental impact assessment, which is all about reducing carbon emissions and impacts to the earth. There's climate change resilience, which is about reducing risk to businesses from these climate events, these weather events. And then we're now offering a new climate badge under the financing and loan facilitation service, advisory service, which is about supporting businesses to find financing for a climate change related innovation or project.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just look at these in a little bit more detail then. So let's look at the environmental impact assessment services in particular. Now, I think it's really useful, but not just for SMEs, but also for those of you that are advisors on the call. You might like to just have a look through these and think about, are there ways that I could expand my services to help businesses with these types of services? So Lily, just tell us a little bit more about this one.
Yes, so environmental impact assessment services is related to mitigation. And really here it's about reducing greenhouse gases that cause climate change, reducing impacts to land and to water. You might have heard of carbon footprint or environmental footprint. So this is that area that deals with it. Activities that you would be doing as an advisor or receiving as a business owner are things like how to reduce the business's air pollution or fossil fuel consumption, understanding the use and reduction of water consumption and of wastewater production, reducing noise pollution. Noise is a pollutant. Waste management. What are you doing with the waste? How are you reducing the amount of waste that you're producing? Recycling, organic composting. Thinking about the land or soil quality and erosion, or if any of the business activities are causing loss or damage to native plants or animals. So those are things that's what you would be focusing with this service area. Right,
and so the service area is really it's about measuring, isn't it? It's like actually understanding, well, what damage am I doing? How big is my footprint? What am I doing to the environment? And I know we said earlier that, we acknowledge that the Pacific, compared to other countries, is not doing the same amount of damage that other bigger countries are doing, but nonetheless, and it's largely because they're so small and the populations are so small, but nonetheless there are still impacts that are happening.
Yes.
So this is a really great starting place by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so climate change adaptation services, what does that include?
Yeah, and we might consider renaming this one resilience. Again, it's the language bit.
Right.
This one is about how to cope better, as you said earlier, Barbara, how to cope better with the effects of climate change. So this is about reducing risks on the business caused from climate. So some of the actions that you might help with as an advisor are things like water management, thinking about how do you manage damages from flood or from drought, being prepared for drought, how to oh, I think that I'm working off of a new updated slide, but I'm just going to throw in a few more things that I haven't written down there that I think are exciting. But designing contingency plans to keep the business running, for example. If there is a climate risk, climate event, you might consider rerouting your delivery of goods or calling in, kind of having a plan B to continue operating. Developing a weather response plan. So what happens when you find out that there is going to be a storm in your area, for example. A pest control strategy, as you have there, or agricultural diversification, for example, reintroduction of native wildlife to restore natural ecosystems, that sort of thing. So that one is really about thinking about the risks of the business. If you are interested in business continuity, for example, this kind of falls under that. Planning and strategy, this is a really good service area for you if you're interested in the overlap of strategy and kind of thinking about how business can thrive in the face of climate impacts.
Right. So as an advisor, then, I mean, adaptation services is very much about, sort of like coping with, improving your ability to continue to survive and succeed, I guess, as a business. So for advisors to help you with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I suppose things like one of the things that I think is really estimated is the importance of design, like designing for that next step. That would fall into this, wouldn't it, I suppose, adaptation services, like thinking about how you might design your business, whether it's the layout of your business, if it's a farm or a horticultural place or tourism operation, how you might design it so that you can mitigate the impacts and adapt to what's going on with climate change.
I guess it would fall under both. Because you could design it in a way that reduces your reliance on fossil fuels and reduces your wastewater generation. So that's under mitigation. And then you could also design it in a way that is somewhere far from a flood zone. Mm-hmm. And for example, has your own energy source so that you are more resilient to when power outages. So there are some actions you could take that would fall under both.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And what about the last one, in the green financing badge?
So green financing is a badge that we have added to the existing financing and loan facilitation advisory area. And it's basically just if you're an advisor that's helping SMEs obtain finance for any climate change project, whether it's mitigation or resilience and adaptation, then you can apply for this badge. And you can help a business access a loan, a grant, overdraft, private investment, anything like that. It all falls under this. So it's all about the money.
Right, and again, I guess it involves some of those other things, doesn't it, from the other two, competency areas, because you've got to justify and provide evidence.
Yeah, so it requires. That's why it's like its own standalone badge, because it requires some new knowledge. But then the skills of applying for a financial product are different than the skills of measuring an electricity footprint, for example.
Yeah. No, awesome. Okay, so How can, so we've got some advisors on the call today, on the webinar, and how can one of our advisors develop the skills and knowledge to be able to provide these services? And that's actually what we're going to cover in our next topic. So let's just whip into those very quickly. Let's have a look at the skills and knowledge required first.
Mm-hmm. Great. So a really essential skill is to understand the difference between mitigation and resilience. And it's tricky, as you've heard us discuss here on the webinar, it is tricky. But so that is one key skill that kind of, it's applicable in any of the areas that you might apply to be an advisor. The ability to identify climate change risks for a business, that's if you're interested in becoming a resiliency advisor. So what are the risks to that business's ability to thrive? Or if you're interested in the mitigation side, you have to be able to identify impacts of that business's activities on air, on land, and on water. Knowledge of current practices, products, and technologies for reducing climate risks or for reducing the business's impacts. And then measuring and reporting on impacts on risks and improvements over time. So being able to set a target, for example, knowing what it is that you're going to be measuring and knowing how you're going to measure that.
Right, and now, so BLP is actually supporting and has got some ways and means of helping advisors to gain this knowledge and the skills and experience. So can you just go over that for us?
Yeah, so excitingly, we've developed some trainings to help develop those skills. We believe in fostering the capacity too, not just demanding stuff. So, we hope to be a learning partner in that. So we've actually just delivered the first climate change innovation training, the basic level, that's happened in Fiji. And that was held in April in 3 locations across Fiji. Content was developed by BLP, and then the in-person delivery was supported by the Asian Development Bank, which was very exciting. And we have an advanced level that we're going to be delivering in June. So these trainings cover topics like the difference between mitigation and resilience, how to scan a business's activities to find those climate risks and find mitigation opportunities. So, those skills we just talked about. And then also how climate change matters for inclusion and diversity. So that's really important because climate change has very different effects on different population groups. In June, we will be covering some more advanced topics like climate solutions for major sectors in the Pacific, how to measure and report on climate impacts and risks, and then how to apply for climate-oriented financial products. So we're trying to support potential advisors in gaining those skills that we think are important to become advisors.
Okay, so and how can people get access to that then?
So far, the idea is that we will be rolling out this training in other countries. We're starting in Fiji, and then the next country we're doing is Papua New Guinea. And the plan over the course of BLP is to make the trainings accessible in across the other countries as well. And then we're still kind of in this first training has been kind of a learning and feedback process. So we're still refining it, but we plan on making it really accessible. If you want to get started now, if you're really keen, as soon as a diagnostic tool gets online, that was the in-depth tool that I mentioned before. So that should be online in the next few weeks. It's a really good place to learn. Essentially, the diagnostic tool can help you understand different areas of action. And then there's some accompanying resources that are helpful for knowing how to advise SMEs on different climate-oriented processes. For example, we have a waste audit tool, which is kind of like a checklist that walks you through how to conduct a waste audit in a business. So if that business manager has filled out the Climate Action Center and you've kind of walked them through the diagnostic tool and you find that waste is a major concern, we're helping you out with step by step, how exactly do you go about and find ways that that business can reduce waste generation? We've done the same with weather hazards, with setting up a weather alert response plan. And then because we started in Fiji, we also have some resources on climate trends in Fiji.
That sounds awesome. So that's a fair bit of support from BLP about both upskilling advisors so that they can help their client SMEs. That sounds fantastic. What other learning resources are available? I mean, I know there's a lot out there on the World Wide Web, but you know, where do people go? I mean, there's so much. Where do you start first? Can you give us a few tips on how to access some other good learning resources?
Yes, sure. There are tons, which is great. And many of them are free. So there are a few that are Pacific oriented, which is really, really helpful. For example, the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program has a climate change portal that contains reports and case studies that you can use to understand what's going on in the region. The Pacific Community, the SPC, has a climate change project site. The Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, or CAKE, that one's that resiliency focused one. It's American, but it has a lot of very good case studies and kind of networky resources for if you're interested in the resilient side. The United Nations, so the United Nations is kind of this core body that is doing a lot of the climate change, the global climate change policy coordination. So they have their official website around climate change, unfccc.int. So there you can learn about what's going on in the world. And every year they've got this global negotiations process, so you can find out about that. And then they have a specific e-learning website, which is the UNCC eLearn, which has free courses on very specific things. So they, for example, they have a course on reducing electronic waste, and they have a course on reducing food waste. So if you want like a short, free, in-depth thing, that's a good place to go. If you feel like you are more kind of activist inclined and really want to join some global movements, there's a Climate Action Network. And if you are interested in knowing what corporations are doing, so larger corporates, there's the UN's Global Compact. That's an interesting site where you can read some case studies of corporate climate change actions, but also you can kind of get a sense of how CEOs are thinking about this and the business case behind some of these climate change actions. So it can kind of give you some language or some insight into how a manager might be thinking through. If you're an advisor, you can kind of get a sense of their priorities. And then you can also do an internet search and find other stuff. So if you are a fan of kind of e-learning sites like Udemy or EDX or whichever one is popular, Coursera, that sort of thing, there's loads that you can learn about. Some of those are not free, some of them are free, so have a look around, but there is a lot of free stuff out there that you can use to learn about climate change.
So it sounds like a lot of it is understanding the terminology and understanding a little bit about the science behind of it. What do you think is quite useful in terms of coming up with pragmatic solutions? Are there any particular sites that you've mentioned that you think help with that? Like I would imagine those case study ones would be quite helpful with that.
Yeah, case studies are great. Case studies are great, especially if you can find case studies that are related to the sectors that you work in. So tourism, for example, was really popular with this group. Retail. So any case studies that have to do with the sector that your business is in or the sectors that the businesses you advise are in, those are really handy, as well as case studies to do with other small islands in the Pacific or in the Caribbean.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Okay, now, folks, we've got another, hang on, what have I skipped there? We've got another poll, that's right. Just another quick set of questions, very short questions. So Sandra, I'll ask you if you could just click the link to that poll into the message box, and then people can click on that whilst we run through some questions, which is another opportunity for engagement with our participants. So let's just pop that that link in the chat box, see if we can get that. That's the one. Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, click on that, everyone. And we've got a few short questions in there, particularly for those that are advisors or interested in becoming an advisor or offering some climate change services. So just some short questions we have in there. And whilst you're doing that, I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions of us. If you do, you're very welcome to also use the chat box, or alternatively, please raise the little hand button. You can turn on your microphone and ask your question. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, you can do either of those two things. Thanks, Pasha, for your comment about mitigation, which can be defined as dealing with the source of the problem. Yeah, that's a nice simple way of looking at it. And in different contexts, e.g. a disaster, the source of the problem is maybe something like lack of preparedness or exposure to hazard. Yes, indeed. But in climate change, the source of the problem is greenhouse gases. So mitigation of climate change is always reducing it. So yeah, the greenhouse gases. Thank you for that comment. I think that's helps clarify that too. Lily, whilst we're just waiting for people to perhaps think of some questions, or if they're busy answering that form, any other comments you want to make on anything we've covered?
I would just encourage, if you're an advisor or potential advisor, have a think about those advisory services that we mentioned, the 3 areas. And if there is an area that is attractive, interesting to you, you know, you think that you would enjoy carrying out some of those activities, reach out to us, and you know, we want to support the development of advisors however we can. So if this is interesting, you know, but you're wondering how you can get prepared, or you think you might need some assistance in applying or preparing yourself, please just send us an email.
Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, for advisors, good to see we've got some responses coming into that poll. Thank you very much. But this is a great opportunity. If you want some more information, you can engage with us through the poll. You can ask some questions now. You can email us afterwards. That's all fine. But yeah, it's a huge need, isn't it? I mean, you know, we're all struggling with this issue across the whole globe. And we need all the support that we can get. So it's great to see that BLP is taking such a proactive stance on climate change and really, you know, including it in its services. I'm really interested in some of the pragmatic solutions that people have come up with. Have you got any examples? You know, when we look back at those questions, perhaps I could just go to some of those questions that or issues that businesses said that that they were dealing with. What sort of things? What sort of things what sort of responses did we have there? Let me just flick back to what they were. These ones here. Any sort of solutions that that you can comment on for some of these questions?
Yeah, you're asking me?
Yep. Yeah, I'm asking you, Lily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fishery one, there is an entrepreneur in Fiji, in Mombasa, who is in the fishery business and has been concerned with the decline of fish stocks. And so their creative solution, because they understood that they have all this distribution, refrigeration and distribution set up. So they thought of, well, how do I use that? Like what else can I use this for? And so now they're going into beef, like meat distribution. So they are it's essentially you're diversifying your income streams. You're setting up another stream of income so that if the fish decline, as fish stock decline, you have this meat, like beef steaks, whatever cuts you want to offer, that can replace and complement your income. So okay. It's something like that. It was a really creative way of understanding, like, what is my competency in, like what assets do I have, and then how do I use them for something that has a different sort of risk profile than fisheries. Yeah,
diversifying income is often about, you know, thinking about your strengths, your skill set, your your asset base, your resource base. Yeah, awesome. So the other one I was quite taken with is, customers are asking if my product is eco-friendly. How do I know, and how do I make my product eco-friendly? I mean, often, when you're producing something, you don't always think through about all of the raw materials that you're using, even down to packaging, for example. You might have to import your packaging. And so suddenly that's impacted your beautiful eco product that you might have, but because you've got to put it in some packaging that's no longer eco-friendly, yeah, you can't answer that. You can't answer that question. Any suggestions for that?
One of the things that is included in our basic training actually is a worksheet that helps advisors go through every step of the business and analyze these things that you just mentioned are so easy to miss. Packaging, transportation, all of your inputs, the disposal process, what's happening to the product after you've used it, all of the stages in the whole life cycle, and kind of walking that advisor through what are all the impacts that this product is having or this service is having. And once you do that, then it starts to become easy to say, oh, that's a problem. Now I just have to start exploring ways to find a different, find an alternative input, for example, find an alternative packaging source. And then it becomes this process of researching and finding out what's available in your location. So, yeah.
Right. So really understanding that value chain and really helps you to unpick what your footprint is at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions? Anyone? Anyone want to make any comments or questions? All very silent today. Okay. Well, look. I think we've covered a lot of information. So, I mean, we've covered not only why businesses must act now, why they must respond to climate change, but we've also covered how they can respond. And we've covered how becoming a BLP approved climate change advisor can also help those SMEs. So thank you for that. Amit, you've got a question.
And we have one in the chat as well.
We've got one in the chat too. Yeah, just spotted that too. So Amit, did you want to pop your microphone on and ask your question? We'll go with you first. Amit, are you there? Okay, well, Tim, we'll go with your question then. I have a question on reporting on climate change impacts. This climate change reporting framework is the only framework that allows companies to report climate change related information in their mainstream financial reports. Are there any available case studies for the Pacific where this sort of report has been used? That's a good question.
Off the top of my head, I don't know of one from the Pacific. But I think that the place to look for that would be the UN Global Compact site, because that is the corporate-oriented website. There are a number of climate change reporting frameworks. So if you're thinking from a corporate standpoint, there's actually not yet any kind of standard global reporting framework that's being used. There are a few. So I would advise you to Google them. So if you just Google climate change reporting corporate or corporation, you'll see there's a few, depending on the region, often some can be more common than others. For example, GRI, it's Global Reporting Initiative. There's TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So that's for banks, mostly, and financial firms, financial institutions. So I think that you'd have to go through and see if you can find examples of that. But I think that my first stop would be the UN Global Compact.
Awesome. Thanks, Lily. Is BLP working with the Nationally Determined Contributions Hub that's supporting governments with the development of projects and programs and sectors?
No, we're not working with them. I think the NDC hub, that's more of a government, they're working with governments and doing more government technical assistance, if I'm not mistaken. Nationally determined contributions is what I mentioned at the very beginning, what I was working on in Canada. It's where countries decide what their carbon target is, or emissions target is. And so that's their contribution to the reduction in carbon. It's kind of a reverse thing. But that is set at a national level. So I would suspect that that's a government thing. But the background, so BLP does engage with national policies from the perspective of it forming the backdrop of our framework and of the way that we work. So in developing our framework and our offerings, we've reviewed a lot of climate change policy documents and had an extensive consultation process as well to ensure that our approach is relevant to what's happening in the countries in the Pacific.
Right. And Pasha, yes, with governments, but enhancing access to public-private partnership funding, also not just mitigation, but resilience projects. So thanks for those questions and comments, Pasha, that's awesome. And Chris, also thank you for your comment. One of the issues in Fiji would be the regulatory enforcement of environmental regulations, particularly for businesses. According to our research, there are currently 3,500 businesses that require environmental auditing, particularly reporting their footprints in terms of air emissions, water quality, etc. Surprisingly, 80% of these businesses are tourism operators. Oh, interesting. So the more incentives there are, I believe this would set precedents for businesses to come forward as its commitment is required. Yes, thank you for that comment. That's awesome, and really great to get these questions coming in, and I'm sure that people watching the recording of this webinar will appreciate hearing those questions too. Anything else, anyone, before we close up for the day? It's really great. Well, we certainly have covered a lot of ground. So thank you so much, Lily, for that, and also for the pointers and where to go for further information on this topic. BLP's website, of course, also includes some great information, as we've discussed already, of course. And this slide has got the links to them if you want to refer to them. Advisors in particular, as I mentioned before, we're really keen to hear from you, either through the poll that's still open at the moment, or in a separate email if you want to know more. So thanks again, everyone, and ka kite anō. We'll see you again next time. Thank you, Lily. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.